Welcome back to Model Citizens, where we talk about how financial institutions build, deploy, and govern AI models in the real world. I'm your host, Kareem Saleh. We're at a fascinating moment in financial services. Banks, fintechs, and regulators are all being pushed in the same direction: move faster, adopt AI, and modernize. At the same time, expectations around safety, soundness, and consumer protection haven't gone away. If anything, they've become more ambiguous. What that's created is a real tension on the ground. Operators are being told to innovate aggressively, while risk and compliance teams are asking reasonable questions like, what's defensible? What's governable? And what does good actually look like right now? What's starting to emerge is a more cooperative model of innovation, one where progress isn't just about shipping technology, but about building shared standards, clear guardrails, and enough confidence for innovation to scale responsibly. Today's conversation is about what that balance looks like in practice. My guest is Sima Gandhi, who's been right at the center of this push and pull. She's the co-founder of the Coalition for Financial Ecosystem Standards, where she's helping the industry define clear, risk-calibrated standards for fintechs partnering with banks. She's also the founder of Alton Strategies and a senior advisor at FS Vector. And she's held senior roles at Plaid, the U.S. Treasury, and American Express, giving her a rare operator's view across policy, compliance, and real-world execution. We're going to talk about why standards matter now, what CFES is actually building, and why independent frameworks and third-party expertise may be the difference between chaos and confidence in this next phase of financial innovation. Sima, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the generous introduction, Kareem. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's just start at the top by framing what's happening right now for banks and fintechs on the ground. From where you sit, what's changed in the last year, especially as institutions are being pushed to adopt AI faster while still being expected to manage risk responsibly?
Let's start with the obvious first, Kareem. We have a very interesting new administration in place. And that has been a little over a year now that we've had a shift in the guard. And I have to say that that translation has been from the leadership across the regulatory agencies, the OCC, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, where regulators are saying it's time to innovate, it's time to move quickly, and I think the tension that we saw over the last 4 years around technology and the apprehension of the unknown has been released. And that is a real change in terms of adoption and permission to move forward that I'm seeing banks embrace. We see this happen on the AI front, on the stablecoin front, and in a way that I think the world looks very different today than it would have looked otherwise. At the same time, in that same 1 year period, though, I think it's safe to say that OpenAI is a household name, right? We are starting to see AI companies continue to push forward at a pace that we've never seen, hitting records in terms of revenue growth, but also importantly in terms of the adoption rate that institutions are starting to absorb. And so that those two forces, from regulators saying to institutions, please move forward, adopt technology, be innovative, compete, and technology evolving faster and faster and faster than best practices can necessarily be articulated by regulators, makes for a very interesting place in which there's a desire to adopt AI faster. But as you said, there's not a lot of clarity around exactly what it means to put in place the right safeguards so that when, as we all know, the pendulum swings again and there's more scrutiny around these practices, that there are defensible safeguards and uh, processes in place that articulate strong risk management.
So it was against that backdrop that you co-founded the Coalition for Financial Ecosystem Standards. Like, what problem? No?
Well, actually, our work started 2 years prior, where I think we were all feeling that pressure cooker, right? There's just so much tension in the system, consent orders across partner banks, real apprehension around adopting technology because felt like there would be a slap on the wrist if you stepped out of line and did something a bit unconventional, even though technology does by definition mean new, right? And so it was really under that backdrop, that pressure cooker, where we said there has to be a better way forward. There has to be an opportunity to say, we need a broader discussion that's constructive. So we're using the same language and helping provide types of best practices that are operationable so that fintech providers, so that fintechs can innovate and move quickly while we're also meeting requirements from regulators. So I think it's interesting that leaders came across the ecosystem to notice that this was a real problem before Synapse even happened. And so when Synapse happened, we'd already started doing a lot of this work. We got more attention after Synapse happened because it was very clear that there's tension in the ecosystem. And we were delighted when last year we extended our work into lending and AI. And we're super stoked to have Fairplay join our group of leaders in the industry that recognize that this is a problem. So we're thrilled that CFES is approaching 2 years in terms of the investment that that we're making to operationalize these best practices and give banks and fintechs clarity around what it means to have best practices in these new technologies and partnerships.
So, for those who might not be familiar, like what does CFES actually do in practice? And maybe you could share a little bit with the audience about how standards are different from traditional vendor risk management and why they matter for kind of
Yeah.
modern bank fintech partnerships.
Yeah, great question. What do we do all day long? So the idea stems from a little vision or big vision I have, which is that industry and regulators should partner more. I think it's really interesting in the U.S. that we have a bit of a uh, not antagonistic, but much more removed interaction with regulators. Where if you go to the UK, and I ran global policy for Plaid back in the day, and we would go meet with different governments and see the cultural interaction there. And the dialogue is much more straightforward and casual. And you could say, hey, what do you think about this? And they're willing to interact in a way that we don't always get from our regulators here. And I like to believe that most folks are operating with good intent, that they're trying to do the right thing, but that when what's right feels a bit like whack-a-mole, that's not setting our innovators up for success, right? So CFES is trying to do exactly that, set up our innovators for success. We're creating real pragmatic operational standards that capture what best practices look like when you're innovating, when you're trying to do risk management. So if you look at what the regulators put out in their guidance, often they'll say something along the lines of, and practitioners should adopt appropriate risk management calibrations. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Right? And they're saying, well, you should consult industries, best practices for the appropriate risk management calibration. And so you're like, well, what does that mean? And what we get in practice is banks talking to each other, trying to figure out what that means. They're like, what did your examiner tell you? What did your examiner tell you? We have this game of telephone, and we have fintech providers that are on the receiving end of that because they themselves can't actually talk to regulators about this. There's all kinds of things around CSI. And we don't have a common framework around which to assess partnerships or novel new technologies. And so, what CFES has started with, and I think a broader mandate is really how do we modernize financial services regulation? Because a lot of it was rooted in a paper based, in person world, right? So, how do we help fintechs that are partnering with a bank, not necessarily selling to a bank, but partnering to a bank, demonstrate that their relationship around around compliance systems, consumer complaint handling, uh, is meeting the best practices for what a partnership, again, not a vendor, but a partnership looks like. And the hope then is that if we're all operating off the same standards and getting assessed against them, then when an examiner comes in and looks at that assessment, they say, there has been a rigorous process here. It's been done against the industry leading standards. I understand what this is. I feel comfortable within the four corners of this document. And so it's going to be a much more constructive conversation versus me feeling like I have to guess and grasp that information that doesn't seem to be quite apparent to me. So that's what CFES does. We convene industry leaders like Fairplay, Upstart around lending, and we talk to banks and we talk to regulators and we solicit that feedback through a collaborative process that we vet through many different players. And we publicly publish these standards and make them available for third party auditors to assess companies against so that we are operating in a world that looks much more like a SOC 2 or PCI compliance, where we all understand what the expectations are and work towards meeting them versus being afraid of adopting because we're going to be punished for something that we had no idea we even had to do.
So you've now been actively engaging regulators around this idea that banks should be able to rely on external standards and third-party experts, whether it's certifications, independent testing, shared frameworks, etc. If you could wave a magic
Hmm.
wand, like what would you want the regulators to say explicitly so that banks and
Yeah.
financial innovators can move faster without feeling like they're taking reckless bets or creating a lot of compliance risk for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, first, I just have to say thank you for engaging on these topics. I know folks may not appreciate how important this conversation around compliance and standards are. But the reality is, this is where a lot of the cost work and the friction is innovation, right? Within a heavily regulated industry, you have to be able to solve for this problem in order to be able to innovate and move more quickly. So if you're a person that loves growth or you're a company that wants to hit your revenue targets, you've got to solve for this, and doing so in a cost efficient way and in a resource efficient way is really important. And that's really what we're trying to do with standards, which are more flexible than regulations that are hard coded into law, right? So when if I could wish my magic wand or wave my magic wand, uh, you know, I'd say, please just publicly say that banks can share the cost of due diligence. This is actually already in the guidance put out by the FFIEC, which is another very wonky acronym. It's the shared kind of governance body these federal regulators use. And they say that banks can share the cost of due diligence. But the problem is, and this is what we've seen over the last decade, is you can say one thing, but if your examiner says another, which is, no, you need to do this whole thing by yourself. And if you don't do the whole thing by yourself, it's not legitimate. Then that scares banks because they talk to each other and they say, oh, wait, whoa, I can't outsource this or use an independent third party auditor. The examiner wants me to do this whole thing by myself. And the logical extension of that is essentially that even when we have quantum computing in banks, the bank is going to have a quantum computing expert to be able to assess their quantum computers. It does not make sense, right? We are not in a horse and buggy type world anymore. We are in a very sophisticated, modern, software enabled world and AI enabled world. And banks need to be able to use outside experts to flag for them issues and assess it against best practices. That's not absolving due diligence. I would argue that's actually doing a better job of due diligence by bringing in the right experts to empower them. So, yes, my magic wand, it's a very simple. It's banks may use outside third party experts to assess components of their stack and their relationships. That's simple, right? It's not even a safe harbor. It's not an absolution of responsibility. It's simply helping banks do this in a more cost efficient and resource effective way. That's it. That would be my magic wand. And brownies and cherry on top if they say that the banks can rely on industry standards. That would be amazing.
So, for bank leaders and fintech founders and compliance teams that might be listening to this, like what's the one thing you would urge them to do right now? Like what is one smart step they should be taking? Other than to join the Coalition for
I,
Financial Ecosystem
well,
Standards.
I was going to save you. Oh, if you obviously reach out to me and talk to me about this, yes. Um, Look, I think that we moved from a world in which there was a pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure on the system. We're now in a world where the pressure's off. That's translating downward slowly, but I think we can all safely say that there's not the same type of intensity there was before. That's opportunity. I think those of us that have been in this ecosystem for years now know that the pendulum is going to swing. And so when there is opportunity, it's the time to invest into the future that you want to see. And I believe that the industry benefits if we come together and start articulating what risk management looks like so that we don't move towards a world again where the expectation is risk elimination, right? Because if it's risk elimination, forget innovation. That's the world we were living in. So banks, partnering with fintechs, adopt the standards as part of your due diligence program, right? Make it part of it so that we're all operating off of standardized lexicon, standardized best practices. The examiner that walks in and sees an assessment against the standards is going to be much more comfortable when he's already seen that before, right? And if we could start doing this through a groundswell movement where we're helping to train the examiners, until the regulators come on and my magic wand works, right? We have got to start being the change that we wish to see. We have got to start saying we're going to be constructive problem solvers in this. We're going to create the world we want to see, and we're going to adopt standards. So that's the main thing I'd say to compliance teams. If you're a fintech and you're building your program for a bank, do it around the standards, right? It's much more interoperable as well. That means bank A, you can use the same stuff for bank A and for bank B. That is a massive time saving versus repurposing for different structured formats. 80% of the data is the same here, right? We're just repackaging it in different ways, and that's nonsense. So that's the one thing I'd say. Be the change you wish to see, use the standards. Let's paint the world we want to see. And when it comes to new novel technologies, I mean, AI, we've talked about this a lot, Kareem. How do we use AI and model risk management and then prove that we're doing so responsibly? Let's figure that out. Let's dig in, right? I can't think of a better partner to work on it than with you. And let's publish that and be a resource so that when folks are looking for this, we can help empower them. I was speaking to someone who used to be at the FDIC, and they said, you know, examiners are people too. They're trying to figure out how all of this works. And from an examiner perspective, if there are standards out there that are recognized, it helps them do their job as well, right? Like we are steeped deeply in this. And imagine if you're an examiner trying to figure all of this out. Let's help them do their job. Let's be that future. Let's help make that future.
I think your exhortation to the industry to be the change we want to see in the world is very wise. Thank you, Sima, for this very important initiative and for your work at CFES.